We've learnt, haven't we, from bitter experience that a problem that arrives in France tends to become Britain's problem as well, given the seemingly porous sea border that we have with them. So it is indeed the case that, as you've identified, arriving in France gives you the capability then to head out to Britain as well. And it's a bit worse than that because, of course, we have this new one in, one out deal, which if you can find some tenuous link to Britain, you could be eligible to be that one in on a legal basis. And have these people been checked? We don't know. Look, there's no doubt there are people in Gaza who've been suffering, humanitarian crisis. But at the same time, there are people in Gaza who clapped and cheered as Israeli hostages were taken, women were raped, bodies were paraded through the streets. They all thought it was a good idea until it became obvious it wasn't. So who we bring in? Who might the French be bringing in? We don't know who these people are, what they believe in. And we've got our own problems, do we not, with rape gangs and things like that? It really, it's a very worrying situation.
Look, there is some evidence here. And by the way, look, hey, before people jump on this, I'm not trying to claim that, people in Gaza have got it easy. I'm not trying to claim that every single person in Gaza is some kind of Hamas supporting monster or anything like that. But we do have some data on this. And Denmark took in 321 Palestinian refugees in 1992. By 2019, 64% of them have been convicted of a crime, including 34% of their children too, and a very large proportion are on welfare in Denmark. And I just wonder, Alan, whether or not this is really quite bad news for Europe if France decides to do this.
Well, one could argue that what the French do is what the French do, but as we've just stated, the reality is that what the French do affects us. So we do have a stake in this. We do have a concern, and the figures you've just quoted are very real. And we know full well that there are, Hamas sympathisers among many Hamas sympathisers among Gazan population. And if you're starting to develop an approach to saying, well, come over here, we just do not know enough about the people coming to determine whether they might be a security threat or whether they are indeed simply people trying to flee from a very difficult situation. The fact we don't know, though, gives us that problem, don't we? The last thing we need is to import more problems into this country. We have enough problems of our own without seeking to bring more in across the borders.
What would it mean, I think, specifically for maybe the Jewish community in Britain, who I know are already facing huge amounts of anti-Semitism, an increase in anti-Semitism as well? Is there a concern here?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think the one thing one can obviously say, regardless of what we do or do not know about the views of many Gazans, they are not seemingly friendly to Jewish people. That's an obvious point. And I think if you bring people or people come over here illegally or legally, whichever way they come in, either way, if you bring in people with strong views of that way, it creates a very difficult social situation. We've already got the effect of that. There was a report, of course, earlier this week showing how anti-Semitism was rife now in middle-class Britain, but we know that's not the only place it's rife, and it's been a resurgence here. When it comes to community relations, it's clearly a problem if we're going to bring people in who we know are ill-disposed towards existing residents of the UK, existing citizens of the UK.
I think a lot of people will be thinking, okay, they look at some of the horrific scenes going on in Gaza, and they feel as though there's people there that clearly deserve some help and all of that, and have maybe been caught up in various different things, and that is a problem. And a lot of people, I think, scratching their heads to go, okay, but why is this Europe's problem? So are there not some countries in the Middle East, in the Arabic world, where it would make more sense for a load of Gazans to go and seek refuge than France, and then probably a small boat into Britain?
Now you've hit the nail on the head here, because the tragedy for the Palestinian people is how badly they've been treated by other Arab nations within the Middle East. It is extraordinary that, as you've just pointed out, they haven't been able to go to countries nearby and escape a war-torn situation. And instead, it somehow becomes Europe's problem, whereas there is plenty of room in nearby countries to do this. But you'll know that for decades, Palestinians have not been granted, sort of citizenship in places where they have been living for those decades, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Jordan, Egypt, and those countries don't want them. That's a brutal truth. So it's a big issue when you have your own neighbours saying no to you, and that needs to also be considered and dealt with, because that's a more effective solution, isn't it?